We are 1 day away from the resumption of Ohio State football practice at the Woody Hayes Athletic Center. Tomorrow, Thursday, July 31, Ohio State will begin preseason camp with its first of 25 practices before its season opener against Texas. The practice will be open to ticketed fans. It will also be open to the media. Andy and I will both be there along with our 11 Warriors colleagues to bring you full coverage of Ohio State football practice. And Andy, it always feels like, especially this past year, the season ending January 20, it felt like spring came up right upon us. That gap from the end of spring to the start of camp always feels like the longest part of the offseason because it's been over 3 months since we've seen any actual football action from the Ohio State football Buckeyes, but that will change in a big way tomorrow.
Yeah, to me this summer has flown by. I don't know if it was the vacations or the trips or if it was just the heat staying indoors a little more often than I do in the summer, but it really has seemed to just like glide right by, and all of a sudden we're talking about preseason camp. We're back from Big Ten media days, ready to get eyes on this team and see where things are at the start of preseason camp. And really, obviously, the ramp up to the season where the position battles are going to be decided, where the team is going to form and take shape and prepare itself the best it can to face a huge marquee week 1 opponent in Texas. So it's going to be an intense few weeks here in August leading up to that game. And really, it's just like, where did the summer go in some ways, but also very excited for some football.
Yeah, no, I'm right there with you. I mean, it's been a little bit of a disjointed summer for me. You can see this is a different location than I used to record from. I moved into a new home a couple months ago, had vacations. Like Andy said, it's been hot here. I mean, anybody who lives in Columbus knows it's been like hot and humid every day for like 2 months in a row. So it's been a little bit of a disjointed summer. And I know, a lot of you out there are probably kind of wondering like what we're doing on the video side because, we haven't done Real Pod Wednesdays in a while, looking at some new things, still kind of hashing out exactly what our video plan is going to look like during the season. But we are going to be ramping up here with a lot more consistent video content on the 11 Warriors YouTube channel and hopefully more on, the audio side for those of you who get your shows that way as well now that preseason camp is ramping up for the Buckeyes. So kind of treating this as like a mini Real Pod Wednesdays today for those of you who have been longtime listeners of the show. Andy and I coming at you on this Wednesday morning with a lot to talk about because Ohio State will begin camp tomorrow. And whenever there's not a surefire starting quarterback going into preseason camp, that will always be the biggest storyline going into preseason camp. So we have to start there. Julian Sayin versus Lincoln Kienholz. The majority of people out there, I think, expect Julian Sayin to be Ohio State starting quarterback this season. You and I have both said it all off season that we do believe Julian Sayin will be Ohio State starting quarterback. But I think we also both agree that this is still a legitimate competition. Ryan Day has insisted that. And I think there's a couple reasons for that. And I think one of those is the fact that I think Lincoln Kienholz has made real strides this offseason to where he's given Ohio State reason to consider him for the job. I think, you look at it just the other day, he was named one of Ohio State's dudes of the week, which, whatever that really means. But what I think it largely means is those are guys that are really kicking butt in summer workouts. I mean, you look at all the guys who have been put on that social media post this offseason, it's been all the guys you hear about who are stepping up as leaders, who are having great off seasons. So the fact that Lincoln Kienholz is in that group tells you something about the kind of offseason he's had. With that being said, Julian Sayin, number 1 quarterback in the 2024 recruiting class, thought he finished spring on a really high note with his performance in the spring game. Ryan Day said it after the spring. There were times this spring where he thought Lincoln was ahead of the quarterback competition, but he thought Julian played better in the spring game. So I think to me, it's fairly simple in the fact that I think if Julian builds off that spring game performance, and if he looks like that over the next few weeks of practice, he'll be Ohio State starting quarterback this year. But if he leaves the door open for Lincoln over the next couple of weeks, I think Lincoln is capable of going through that door.
I agree, and to me that ceiling for Julian is still higher as a pure passer. Lincoln does so much in the run game that I think that could actually be something that maybe cracks the door a little wider. But both you and I think, are definitely heavily leaning toward Julian Sayin in this competition. And um, all things considered, in the spring, I saw a lot of what you want to see from Julian Sayin in that spring game. We talked about it at length, but it's that confidence in the pocket, that poise. Now, he was reading very vanilla defenses. Ohio State only really ran 2 defenses in that spring game. And now it's about applying that consistency when you're actually having to diagnose these things in practice and take it to that next level. And then that's going to be the thing I think that's determined quarterback competitions in the past for Ryan Day is the consistency. Can Julian put it together practice to practice to practice to where it's not just this one big spring game outburst, it's also doing it behind the scenes on a daily basis to show all things equated. Yeah, he's going to have the higher ceiling, but if Lincoln's clearly the guy ready to go at the start of the year, I think that's where the opportunity is for him to get involved. And I think Lincoln could be a really good quarterback too, especially with that athleticism, the things he can do with his feet. There's options there, but we're definitely leaning Julian Sayin. I think for me, one of the more interesting position battles too in entering preseason camp is going to be the strong safety competition. And calling it a battle is a little looser of a term than usual with other positions, because I think we both expect Jaylen McClain and Malik Hartford to play plenty in this defense. Both those guys have skill sets that are really fun and really good. I definitely, you've heard a lot of talk about, especially Malik Hartford's versatility and the ways he can roll around the defense. Caleb Downs obviously played all over the place, and so they're going to have guys in both of them that can play that sort of not play that Lathan Ransom role and do different things in coverage to free Caleb up. Obviously, you're going to do some stuff with the nickel too and get that involved. But you beyond that quarterback competition, I really think that strong safety battle is intriguing to see how exactly they're going to fit those pieces into the defense. As much as the position battles on defense, like there's a few that are intriguing, are important. It's also about how is Matt Patricia employing his players in this scheme early. How is Ohio State? Yeah, they want to get Jaylen McClain and Malik Hartford on the field together potentially. How does that look? How does C.J. Hicks fit into the plan, maybe at defensive end, if he gets in the plan at all? How was, there's a lot of moving parts with this defense, a lot of gifted athletes that maybe are best utilized in certain roles that we didn't see as much used in the Jim Knowles scheme of the past few seasons. And how do you get those guys involved? How do you get these different archetypes of players involved? And I think the strong safety competition is a fantastic example of that.
To tie things up on the quarterback competition, I think to your point, Ryan Day said last week that, there's no messing around. Like, we got to be ready to go in week 1. So I think, that adds a level of urgency to this quarterback competition that's different from, a couple of years ago when they kind of allowed the Kyle McCord, Devin Brown competition to bleed into the season. Like, they can't do that. Like, you got to go with whoever you think gives you the best chance to win against it. Because the reality is this simple. If whoever that starting quarterback is in week 1 does not play well, Ohio State will be 0-1 after playing Texas. Like, Texas is too good a team. Arch Manning doesn't have a ton of experience either, but he's at least played in a couple games. You have the feeling he's going to be one of the best quarterbacks in the country. Whoever that starting quarterback is for Ohio State has to be ready to go. And the hardest thing about that competition is there's no real way to simulate that until you actually go play the game. Like, it'll be interesting to see. Probably wouldn't happen in these first few practices regardless, but, behind the scenes, if we hear about it at all, will they do it all like they did in the spring and make the quarterbacks live at all just to see how they handle the pass rush? Because I think that's my biggest question with Julian Sayin is, how well can he handle those live bullets coming at him? Will he maintain that accuracy, maintain that decision making when he has those live bullets coming at him? I would guess Now that it's closer to the season, they're probably not going to make the quarterbacks live at all in preseason camp because it's too late in the game now to risk suffering an injury at that position in preseason camp. But that's the biggest thing is they have to find competitive situations. They have to see how those guys perform in those situations. And like you said, Andy, the defenses they're going to be going against in those competitive situations in practice when we're not there to watch, when the game's not on TV, are going to be far more complex than the ones that they saw in the spring game. So that's going to change the evaluation a bit. And I think that's what they really need to see from Julian Sayin is, we've all seen it. Like he's got that quick release. He's got the arm strength. He's got the accuracy. When he's just out there throwing on air, he looks great. But how's he going to handle it when it's live bullets? You're going against a live defense. You've got to diagnose defenses like that. That's the whole question right now for both of these guys because neither of them have really do it. I think certainly what you're hoping for is a lot like what we saw from Will Howard a year ago, where we went into camp a year ago and we're like, is Will Howard really the guy? Like we just hadn't seen enough in the spring. It was kind of like, are we sure Will Howard's going to be an upgrade? And then those first few practices of spring, we really saw Will start to get into a groove. And it's like, all right, this is a different guy than we saw in the spring. If he keeps this up, Ohio State has its quarterback. And of course, the rest is history. We know what Will Howard did. So the hope is that either Julian Sayin or Lincoln Kienholz will be able to be that guy. The next few days, the next few weeks are going to start to give us a clearer picture into whether either or both of them is ready to be that guy. But going back to what you talked about with the defense, I certainly think strong safety is the most true position battle on defense in the sense of, I think, you talk about what we think the starting lineup on defense is going to be. You think about that secondary. We obviously know Caleb Downs is going to be starting free safety. Davis Igbenogson and Jermaine Matthews Jr. pretty locked in as the starting corners. Nichols, maybe a little bit more of a question mark. I think Lorenzo Styles Jr. is in position to be that starting nickel, but you talked about with Matt Patricia, there's some creative things that they could do where, there could be lineups where Lorenzo Styles is in there as a nickelback. And there could be lineups where both Malik Hartford and Jaylen McClain are on the field with Caleb Downs as free safeties. There could also be packages where Devin Sanchez comes in as a third corner or Aaron Scott comes in as a third corner and Jermaine Matthews kicks inside to nickel. So the good news is they have a lot of talent to work with there in that secondary. I think both Malik Hartford and Jaylen McClain are going to play this year. I think there are going to be roles for both of them. It's just a matter of what will those roles look like. And you do figure in the base defense, it is a competition between those two for a starting spot. So I'm going to be interested to see because I think I went into spring thinking Jaylen McClain was the front runner. I think I came out of spring thinking Malik Hartford was the front runner. Yet I go into camp feeling like it's still an open competition that could go either way.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat with you because, again, I like the skill sets of both these guys a lot. I think they do different things. Jaylen McClain, if you're looking for someone specifically to fill the Lathan Ransom role, to me has more of that downhill physical aggression, come up in the box and hit you type of skill in his game, but still good in pass coverage. Like you saw it freshman year in the spring game for him, intercepting that pass from Julian Sayin and might have been a pick six if it weren't blown dead. But what he did in that play, what he's shown in the reps he got already climbing the depth chart to crack Ohio State's two deep as a true freshman last year, and ultimately play more snaps than Malik Hartford, who played as a true freshman as well back in 2023. But in 2024, McClain, third most snaps among the safeties, the deep safeties, and he really took strides really quickly, and a guy that, give a lot of credit, has outperformed his recruiting ranking already. I think relative, not that being a low-end four-star guy is anything to sneeze at, but by Ohio State standards, he wasn't like Jeremiah Smith coming in, everyone's expecting the world right away. He made waves early. He put his head down. He worked. A lot of credit to that kid to put himself in this position where now entering year two, he could be a starter in this defense and has shown that he has the tools to go do that. But Malik Hartford's also been waiting his turn. since he saw those reps as a freshman. And again, the versatility in his game. I think if you're talking deep zone coverages and some of that more traditional drop back safety stuff, maybe some of the things that supports a Caleb Downs when he's coming and playing near the line of scrimmage, that's where I like Malik Hartford a little more. And in those areas of, again, just that deep safety, ball hawk, play over the top. I think so. These guys have complementary skill sets. They bring different things to the strong safety position. I think, and exactly how Ohio State deploys them gets in this defense again is going to be one of my favorite things to watch and just see how they play off Caleb Downs here in fall camp. We won't get too many schematic hints early in fall camp when we get to watch practices versus when they play Texas. Obviously, that'll be the biggest informer, but still a storyline I'm going to be watching. And if I had to give the lean to one or the other as a front runner right now, I'd probably say Malik Hartford just because of really how much he was talked up by Matt Guerrieri and Matt Patricia in the spring. And really, again, used in that role. I think there was some stuff maybe that kept him from getting as much usage as they wanted him to get last year. So on the injury front, banged up a little bit maybe. I think if I were to make a choice right now as to who I think the front runner is for that base strong safety lead position, I would go Malik Hartford, but I can say it going either way. There's strengths to both guys, and I expect them both to see the field plenty this year.
Another position I know we're both going to be watching very closely at camp is the defensive line because, of course, Ohio State replacing all 4 of its starters along the defensive line. And it feels like 3 starters are pretty well entrenched. I think defensive tackle, we fully expect Edric Houston and Caden McDonald to be the starting DTs. I think Kenyatta Jackson Jr., based on everything we've heard last week, it'll be a shock if he's not a starter. I mean, they're talking about him like he could be a captain. I mean, Sonny Styles is saying he could be a first-round pick. So I think Kenyatta Jackson certainly seems to be in line to be that number 1 defensive end going into camp. The rest of that defensive end rotation is going to be very fascinating, though, to see how that plays out because bring in Bo Atkinson. This is going to be our first opportunity to watch Bo Atkinson since he enrolled after spring practices. You've got Caden Curry, a guy who, like Kenyatta, has been waiting his turn. I think has played well in limited duty when he was backing up Jack Sawyer and JT Tuimoloau the past couple of years. You've got CJ Hicks, you mentioned before, who to me is the ultimate wild card on this defense. 5-star recruit, top 10 overall prospect. If it all comes together for him and it clicks for him moving into this hybrid edge defender role, I mean, he could be one of the stars of a defense. It's also possible he could be the 5th defensive end on the depth chart and not play very often. Like, I think there's such a wide range of possibilities for what CJ Hicks's senior season could look like that he's going to be one of the most fascinating players to watch in camp. And then Logan George as well. I mean, Logan George was one of the stars of a spring game. I think he had at least 2 sacks in that game, was very disruptive as a pass rusher, a guy who had 19.5 tackles for loss at Idaho State last year. So the good news for Ohio State is I think they've got a lot of depth at defensive end. If Kenyatta Jackson can become what people are saying he can become, and Bo Atkinson can be at least as good as he was last year at North Carolina, I think this defensive end position, even without Jack Sawyer and JT Tuimoloau, has a chance to be a strength of this team. But we'll get a better idea of that over the next few weeks.
Yeah, it's all about production with these guys for me. Caden, Kenyatta have been in the program long enough, saw what Bo did last year at North Carolina. To me, like, the pressure rate numbers, and this is, advanced analytics stuff, whatever. The pressure rate numbers relative to the sacks he produced were kind of low. And so you'd like to see that rise a little more for Bo, I think. And maybe that's something in fall camp that if you're talking about like the battle between him and Curry and Jackson, who's the actual 2 starting defensive ends in this defense, that could be something that maybe sways it. I don't know. Or those sacks numbers are legitimate. He shows in camp to be in force. He's really good. I'm not going to write off either possibility. I think there's definitely proven elements of production with Bo Atkinson's game. He's going to be involved in the rotation, clearly. But I think for me, this feels like a battle between him and Caden to be the second starter alongside Kenyatta. The way that, like you said, Kenyatta was talked up at Big Ten Media Days, talked up throughout the offseason. Larry even has kind of referenced multiple times throughout the course of like the preparation for this season of wanting Kenyatta to be the alpha in that room, step up, be the leader. You bring in Bo Atkinson, you bring in Logan George, you bring in, there's a lot of depth now, like you said. And I think guys that can do different things, Logan George, despite, really good pass rusher in the spring game, maybe that is an element of his game that we're underappreciating, but it does feel like he was brought in to be more of that first, second down reinforcement in the trenches for run defense. And if that's how he's deployed, if you can give guys a break that way, then great. Again, CJ Hicks, like you said, total wild card in this. I think for CJ, it's all about run defense and instincts, as intangible a thing as instincts are. We saw it when he was out there at linebacker, whether it was, I'm not going to, it's hard to know what it was without being behind the scenes, whether it was a lack of preparation, a lack of confidence, a lack of just feel, and like I said, instincts, just kind of how I all branch it together. He just seemed to step slow in certain opportunities when playing a traditional linebacker role, and even sliding down and doing some more edge rusher things in spots last year, rare spots, but spots last year. The run defense in particular, sometimes he would just, he had a tendency to overrun plays or get out of position on those sorts of things. I think that's the major hole in his game that needs patched. If he wants to be a serious every down contributor for the defense, it can't just be, hey, CJ, straight arrow at the quarterback. That's all you can do, right? It needs to be more of defending the run, staying disciplined, like BCRS for those who know some football terms. Like this is, you need more well-roundedness and more instinct in CJ Hicks's game. And I think he knows that. I think that's what's been worked to address this offseason with him. If he finds it, he still has insane athletic gifts. Like, that's never been the issue with CJ Hicks. He still has insane athletic gifts. But can he find the well-roundedness of a football player to where he's more than just someone you can bring on in a third and long, obvious passing situation and get heat on the quarterback? If he's that in the defense, that's still a role you can fill. That's still something you can do, but that's not living up to the 5-star recruiting billing. That's kind of where it is with CJ Hicks in my eyes, is if he can round himself out as a football player, he could maybe even come out of nowhere and be a star in this defense. But he's got to, again, be able to do more than just be that straight arrow going after the quarterback. So the wild card in that room, for me, it's a battle between, like I said, Bo Atkinson, Caden Curry, and didn't talk much about Caden, but love the motor he showed, especially the last 2 years. Now it's again about production with him and proving that he can be a consistent every down player. That's where it stands for me with the defensive room. Those two guys competing to start opposite Kenyatta. What CJ Hicks going to be? And then Logan George also providing some nice depth out there.
Outside of quarterback, I think the position we've probably talked about most this offseason is the defensive tackle position, and that will certainly be in focus as well as the Buckeyes start camp on Thursday. Again, not so much of those starters, but with the backups. Will Ohio State have 2 or 3 backup defensive tackles behind Caden and Edric who can spell those guys? Because you don't necessarily want your starting defensive tackles playing 60 snaps a game. You want to have guys who can come in at least occasionally and spell them without a massive drop off. That's one of the biggest points of uncertainty of this team right now. It seems like the guy whose stock is rising at the moment is Will Smith Jr., another guy. He was just named as a dude of the week on Tuesday. We heard great things about him last week from Ryan Day and Sonny Styles. So he's certainly one guy I'm going to have my eye on. We didn't get to see him play in the spring game. How does he look in there, especially on, those running plays, if we get to see any one-on-ones, how does he look in those situations? Can he really cement himself as that number 3 defensive tackle for the Buckeyes this year? And then beyond him, I think the first 2 guys you look at are Tywone Malone and Jason Moore. Tywone Malone's a guy, 5th-year senior. This is his last chance if he's going to make his mark. I mean, he started a game last year, actually played pretty well, and then faded out from there, wasn't able to, consistently entrench himself in that rotation. So there's clearly still more they want to see from him. Same as Jason Moore. I mean, Jason Moore is a guy, physically, he looks the part of a guy who could be a very good free technique. But it seems like it just hasn't quite all come together for him yet, for him to be a guy that they trust to play significant snaps particularly in run defense. And so I think you're really hoping to see, Will Smith Jr. continue to build off the momentum he has right now. You're hoping things come together for Jason Moore and or Tywone Malone. And then Jarquez Carter could be another guy to watch as well. There's been some buzz about him this summer as well, coming off of his spring. So that's another guy. The door's certainly open there for a freshman, whether it be a Jarquez Carter or a Maxwell Roy, to climb the depth chart quickly. It seems like Carter's probably the guy with the best chance to do that, particularly because he went through spring, whereas Maxwell Roy did not. But one way or another, Ohio State needs a couple of those backup defensive tackles to show something over the next few weeks.
Yeah, and going back, obviously Sonny talked up Kenyatta Jackson Jr. a lot. Will Smith Jr. might have been the number one guy he talked up outside of Kenyatta, called him an absolute baller, said he was one of the guys who took the biggest steps this spring. I think you need, obviously, that guy to step up in that backup nose tackle role behind Caden McDonald. Will's about 290. I think you'd like to see him add a little more weight to fill that job. But if out of the guys that are in this conversation, those three names, Tywone Malone, Jason Moore, Will Smith Jr., if you asked me which one of those guys has the best nose guard body type, I'd probably say Will Smith Jr. So it's good to hear that he has taken those steps and started to emerge, because he's a guy that I think maybe with the right molding could be that nose tackle option behind Caden McDonald there, and Endrick Houston, who I think I'm pretty high on. What I've been really high on Kenyatta all offseason, what he's going to be in this defense, how menacing he was at nose tackle. Even in those goal line scenarios, he was a key part of goal line stand university this past season, and making so many of the stands and so many of the, at least setting up so many of the plays with good interior run plugging and route hogging there in the trenches, what that defense did in so many goal line scenarios. But obviously, again, you need that backup, because I don't think Caden's preparing himself. He says he's in the best shape of his life when we talked to him recently, but he needs someone to get some of those reps off of his body and still be a serviceable nose guard. Obviously, coming off the field in Rushman packages might be able to help with that too. But Will Smith Jr. stepping up in this way, and also being the 3-tech, he could be the next guy up at both positions. That's very much on the table, I think. Behind Endrick, too, at the 3-tech spot. But you have a little more confidence, as we've talked about a lot this offseason, a little more confidence that someone is going to be a serviceable enough backup at that 3-tech position between Moore, Malone, and Smith. It was more that nose tackle spot. And I think hearing the progression of Will Smith was encouraging for that, both from Ryan Day and Sonny Styles, who talked him up. And that is going to be important. Jarquez Carter, too, like you said, I like the idea of maybe the door being open for a freshman. He's a guy that could pack on some weight and be ready at that nose guard spot, also coming in at about 290. And so this is a defensive tackle position that we've been talking about the depth all offseason. It's going to be about molding it, and Ryan Day was very cognizant of that fact at Big Ten Media Days too. Said that at a certain point in the portal, it was about there's not options here that we think are clearly better than what we have, and we're going to focus on maximizing these guys. And he said that group has been pushed especially hard by Mick Marotti and the team strength and conditioning staff this summer, knowing the physical readiness they're going to need there in the trenches and trying to get that next wave of guys to step up behind Caden and Endrick. And he looped Will Smith in with those guys, which I think was the most telling thing anyone said about Will Smith. Was he kind of mentioned him in the same breath as Caden and Endrick, and I think that was the first time we've heard someone else's name mentioned with those two guys as like people at defensive tackle for Ohio State. And what a great story it would be too, obviously. I think we have to mention that. It's the son of an Ohio State great who was killed in a tragic road rage incident, obviously. Great New Orleans Saint, won a Super Bowl. Like, what an incredible story it would be if Will Smith Jr. ends up being a star for this team. Like, I got to say that too.
Yeah, I think it would be very popular among Ohio State fans if Will Smith Jr. ends up becoming a difference maker on that defensive line. I mean, grew up right down the road, played at Dublin Kaufman High School, obviously an Ohio State legacy, someone whose father is an Ohio State legend. So would be very cool if Will Smith Jr. is able to follow in his father's footsteps and become a difference maker on that Ohio State defensive line. Goals Line Stand University, Andy giving a nice plug for our dry goods store. If you're looking to up your wardrobe here going into the season, be sure to check out the 11 Warriors dry goods store. Pick up a Goal Line Stand University or one of our many other great t-shirts. Lots of great options available there for you if you're looking for some gear that you can wear to the Ohio State-Texas game or when you're watching Ohio State football games with your buddies. Lots of good gear there. Hope you go check out the 11 Warriors dry goods store. We can't finish this show without talking about Andy's favorite position, which is, of course, the offensive line. And the offensive line is going to be another interesting position. It's a position where, like, I think I could sit here right now and feel like I have a pretty good idea of what the starting offensive line is this year, because I think it's probably going to be Ethan Anianwa at left tackle, Luke Montgomery at left guard, Carson Hinsman at center, Tegra Shabola at right guard, and Austin Sierreveld at right tackle. But I'd only write that in pencil. Like, I think there's still competition that's going to happen here in camp. I think Philip Daniels is a big reason for that, the Minnesota transfer. Can he take a step forward from where he was in the spring and really make a case that he should be the starting right tackle? If so, what does that mean at guard? Like, Ryan Day has made no bones about the fact that he expects Austin Sierreveld to be a starter for Ohio State this year. I mean, he has talked him up at every opportunity. So I fully expect that Austin Sierreveld is going to be a starter this year. The question is just what position. Right tackle seems like the obvious position because you've got two returning starters from the CFP run in Luke Montgomery at left guard and Tegra Shabola at right guard. But what if Philip Daniels proves to be one of Ohio State's top two tackles, or even Ian Moore proves to be one of Ohio State's top two tackles, and you move Austin Sierreveld back at guard? I mean, you have a guy like Tegra Shabola who started every game for Ohio State last year. Could he be in jeopardy of losing his starting job? I don't rule it out because I think they really like where Luke Montgomery's at. I think Luke Montgomery really made a great surge there at the end of the season and has carried a lot of momentum off of how he played in the CFP. We saw, even though Tegra started all year, he was rotating still with Austin in those CFP games. So I think he, even though he's the only guy on the line who's a full season returning starter from last year, still might have to lock down that starting right guard job in preseason camp. I mean, I think the two guys who feel really solid in their spots are Ethan Anianwa at left tackle and Carson Hinsman at center. And it certainly feels like Austin Sierreveld is going to start somewhere, whether it's left guard, right tackle. I'd put the money on right tackle, but he's going to start somewhere. But that sets up kind of some interesting competition there with guys like Philip Daniels, Ian Moore, even Joshua Padilla. I mean, I don't really see a spot for Joshua Padilla to crack the lineup this year, but he's been talked up some as another guy who's made strides this year going into his third season at Ohio State. All of this is a good problem to have, Andy, because we saw what happened last year, how important offensive line depth is. If Ohio State's 7th and 8th guys on the offensive line, which were Luke Montgomery, Austin Sierreveld, guys like that, if they had not been able to step up last year, Ohio State would not have won a national championship, because to be able to replace two guys of Josh Simmons and Seth McLaughlin's caliber, that's a hard thing to do. So this is a good problem to have a guy like Austin Sierreveld who can move along the line and play 3-4 different positions potentially. To have guys like Philip Daniels and Joshua Padilla and Ian Moore, who may not be in the starting lineup, but you probably feel pretty good about as backups. Nevertheless, all of those guys want to play. So it's going to make for some interesting competition, and I'm going to be interested to see how do they manage those reps, because we saw Tyler Bowen roll guys a lot in the spring. Does he continue to do that here in camp, or does he start to solidify around a solid starting five?
Yeah, to me, I think spring was a lot about cross-trading guys at those various positions so that you can, when you determine, hey, these are the best 5 offensive linemen we have, you have different ways to plug in those guys and play them. I think it's clear that Austin Sierreveld is part of that best 5, winning the Iron Buckeye. Like you said, the way he was talked up in the spring, throughout the offseason by Day, by Bowen even. So to me, the competition is as much between it's more between Philip Daniels, Tagra Shabola, and maybe Luke Montgomery to round out that starting five. I like Joshua Padilla's game. He seems more only in the plans at center, and so unless he's like so clearly in that best five that they want to bump Carson Hinsman back over to a guard spot, where he was really good last year. Carson Hinsman was awesome at guard a couple of games he played before Seth McLaughlin got hurt last year. If that's the only way I can see him really getting involved, I guess, and Ian Moore, I would put both of them on kind of the outskirts of the possibility. It's really between Philip Daniels, Tagra Shabola, and Luke Montgomery. And to your point, Luke, to me, I think is going to be an all Big Ten caliber player this year. I'm really high on Luke, like the team seems to be coming off that CFP run, becoming more well-rounded. The athletic traits, I think he has a higher ceiling than a lot of the other offensive linemen here. A lot of them are going to be really good players this year, but I think Luke has always been, since high school, he's had that athletic profile, being a really, really good guard. And he's starting to realize a lot of that potential in the college football playoff, and I love his mentality. Tagra Shabola, yeah, he did start all of last season, but there were clear holes in his game at various points of the year that he needs to address and fix those issues moving into 2025 if he wants to hold down his starting job. I mean, there's a reason by the end of the college football playoff run, it was Luke Montgomery playing every snap in those last two games, and Austin Sierraveld and Tagra Shabola rotating exclusively at right guard. Some of that was injury stuff. Austin was pretty banged up at the end of the year, but it just, again, it goes to show in a line where you're saying, hey, you've got 5 or 6, 7 guys that are all really tight in this competition, it's splitting hairs to see who's going to be in that starting unit. And do they rotate guys again? I mean, it worked in the CFP to keep people fresh. It goes against conventional football wisdom, but it's not the first time Ryan Day has done it either. They're willing to rotate guys. I don't know if it's going to be the preference, the deference to do that, but it is on the table that you could roll offensive linemen. It's the only position outside quarterback really in football that doesn't get rolled that way traditionally again, but they did it in the CFP and it really worked. So that is something that could be on the table, but whenever you're talking about offensive line battles, it's never really something that enters your mind. For me, the 5, again, if I were to make the call today, are what you said. Austin Sierraveld, right tackle, Tagra Shabola, right guard, Carson Hinsman, center, Luke Montgomery, left guard, Ethan Onyanwa, left tackle. But it's going to be a lot about what Philip Daniels is like this preseason camp. Can he push to be clearly in that 5 best offensive linemen for Ohio State? And then you bump Austin back inside, and it's a competition at guard again. So a lot of this is going to hinge on Philip Daniels, I think. But either way, I think you have a lot of confidence in the offensive line, and particularly the interior offensive line being a strength for this Ohio State team.
The last real position battle I think we could touch on here would be kicker and punter, because Ohio State does have a couple of options at both of those positions. They brought in Jackson Corville out of a transfer portal from Ball State to compete with Jaylen Fielding at kicker. Meanwhile, at punter, you have Joe McGuire come back. You also have, as Andy affectionately calls him, Big Kick Nick McLarty, going into his second year, trying to win that starting punting job. So we'll see how much kicking and punting we get to see during these first few practices, but I'll be interested to see what those look like as well. I think Jaylen Fielding is going to be the starting kicker this year based on the way he finished last season, especially considering he was working through a hip injury. But you do look at Jackson Corville's stats at Ball State, very comparable in terms of the field goal percentages, but Jackson Corville does have a couple of 50-plus yard field goals to his name. Jaylen Fielding does not have that yet. So could that give Corville a chance to win the job? We'll see. I think it'll at least be a competition, at least gives someone to push Jaylen Fielding here in preseason camp, and we'll see how that ultimately unfolds. Same thing at punter. I think, Nick McLarty's a guy, you see how big he is. You see the massive leg. If he can get consistent with that, he could be one of the best punters in college football. But the problem is, even again this spring, just too many mishits, not enough consistency in terms of hitting that ball. straight, hitting that ball the way you're supposed to. And so we might get a better idea on that one, maybe even kicker here in preseason camp. Of if Nick McLarty is hitting that ball consistently, I think he's got a chance to win that starting punting job. But if that doesn't happen, then they've got a guy in Joe McGuire who was reliable last year that they could stick with.
Yeah. I think too, one thing you could look at kicker potentially is having a little bit of a platoon situation. If you like have a situation where you need someone to come in and hit a 50-plus yarder at the end of the game, maybe Corville's the guy you turn to, and it's Jaden Fielding for everything else. Maybe one of them, maybe Corville handles kickoffs too if he has the stronger leg. That's another option on the table in the kicker competition. Otherwise, I don't see, given how the progress he made at the end of last year, Michigan game notwithstanding, playing through the hip injury, not a whole lot of reason to move on from Jaden Fielding. Having a guy that's consistently hitting field goals is not something a lot of college teams necessarily have the luxury of. Fielding has done a really good job. But it's an interesting thing, again, to see what they'll do at the kicker position with those two, if Jackson Corville maybe can actually push him to win the job. At punter, I agree with everything you said. To me, it's Nick McLarty has this great big ceiling with that great big leg of his. Big kick Nick, when he hits the ball properly, it can go 70 yards and it's amazing. But if it's much more about consistency at that position, I'd rather have someone I know can hit it 45 every time rather than one time it's 30 and one time it's 70, because it's a very limited sample size in a football game where you're actually punting the ball, hopefully at least. And the guy who's more consistent and that you can count on to at least flip the field remedially for your defense, that's the guy you're going to turn to. And that's
a bad punt hurts you more than a good punt helps you. Not that
exactly.
a good punt or a great punt can't help you, but a bad punt hurts you more than a good punt helps you.
Exactly. And look, credit to Nick. Talking to him, interviewing him in the spring, was very mature about last season, coming in expecting to start at first, but realizing that Joe was the better man for the job at that time and that he had things to work on in his game. Said he considered the transfer portal in the offseason, but stuck it out because he wants to be the best at this. He wants to play with the best. He wants to be at the team that's the best in college football right now. That's Ohio State, coming off its national title. And being willing to put in the work, long hours he spent with John Furlman this spring and summer, really trying to work on hammering out those little mishits, those things in his punting. How he corrects it, we'll see. I think, again, if he can reach a certain level of consistency, he's the best punter on this roster, but it is all about finding that consistency, and it's hard with such a big leg sometimes. You've got to, like, the mishits, like he said before, are very exaggerated. So if he is able to iron that out, I'm rooting for Big Kick Nick just for the nickname. It's fun, and I think very just fun story coming from Australia. Of course, Joe McGuire's from Australia too, but it's that'll be a bit of a fun battle to watch in camp, and maybe one that we get some of the most info on, frankly, in the few camps we get to watch, because it's very easy to watch the punters and go, oh, that one went far, that one didn't. So, we'll get some good intel on that early in the fall.
Well, we're going to have a lot more to talk about the rest of the week, as Ohio State practices will be open on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. Andy and I will both be out there tomorrow, and we'll be back after practice to hit you with some of our top observations of the day in a new episode of Press Coverage. So we hope you will join us again then. For now, he's Andy Anders. I'm Dan Hope. Thanks for listening in. We'll catch you next time.